40 years of marriage didn't end with a letter. It didn't end with a fight, either. It ended over lunch. A lunch I wasn't invited to. I sat in the glass-walled conference room where I usually went to prep the quarterly reports. From that corner, I could see the café across the street, and there they were, my husband, the man who once promised me forever, laughing over coffee with his assistant. Her hand rested on his, casual, young, like the future belonged only to them. And then I saw it. He pulled out the pen we bought together when we opened this company. Our initials, engraved side by side, but today it wasn't signing our dreams, it was signing them away. A contract slid across the table. He signed it without hesitation. She smiled as if she had won some quiet battle. Around them, other business people watched, murmuring, probably already guessing what I hadn't been told. Behind me, someone in the office paused by the door, caught my eye, then looked away. No words, no warning. Maybe they already knew. Maybe everyone did, except me. I didn't cry. I stood, calm, quiet. I walked across the street like I was just picking up a late lunch. When they left the cafe, he forgot the pen on the table. I picked it up, feeling the cold metal against my palm. Funny how trust feels warm when you give it away, but cold when it's left behind. I walked back to the office where the walls held all our history, awards, contracts, a framed newspaper from when we first made the cover of the business journal. And in that moment, I remembered something I'd almost let slip away. I'm not just his wife. I co-founded this company. And on paper, I still own the majority. I just let him play the front man because I thought it mattered to him. I thought it mattered to us. I held the pen again, reading the tiny engraved letters that time hadn't erased. My name was still there, side by side with his. But today, only one of us remembered why we carved it there in the first place, and for the first time in years, I asked myself, what happens when the person behind the curtain finally steps into the light? The next morning, I returned to work before anyone else. It was still dark outside, and the office lights buzzed softly overhead. I sat at my desk and placed the pen gently in the drawer, shutting it away. For now, I opened the latest company emails, scanning through announcements and meeting notes, when something strange caught my eye. A scheduled meeting, one I normally led, had been reassigned, not to me, but to the assistant. Maybe it was a mistake. I checked the following week's calendar, another meeting, her name again. I scrolled further. A budget review, an operations meeting, a client call, all of them, shifted, quietly. No announcement, no discussion. Just gone from my plate, like they were never mine to begin with. I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Maybe this was his way of transitioning me out quietly, so no one would question it. A clean exit. No scenes, no confrontations. But this company didn't start on his desk. It started on our kitchen table, spread between coffee cups and crayon drawings when the kids were young and we couldn't afford office space. He handled the presentations. I managed the contracts. I knew the numbers better than anyone. I closed the laptop softly, listening to the faint hum of the building waking up. How long had this been happening? Had I been so busy supporting his spotlight that I didn't notice the stage shifting beneath me? Footsteps echoed down the hall. 2 junior managers passed by, laughing quietly about a new client deal. They stopped when they saw me through the glass, exchanged a brief glance, and kept walking. For a moment, I wasn't their boss. I was just the woman who used to be important here. I leaned back in the chair where I had spent so many late nights, where I signed our first lease, where I hired our first employee. And in that stillness, doubt crept in. Did I step back too far? Did I make myself invisible so that he could shine? A quiet knock interrupted my thoughts. The receptionist peeked in, hesitant. Mr. Walker asked if you'd be joining the leadership meeting today, she said, carefully avoiding my eyes. I smiled, thin and practiced. Number, I think I'll just observe this one. The door clicked shut behind her. I sat alone, the hum of the air conditioning filling the silence. I wasn't angry yet, but the cracks were showing. That night, I sat at the kitchen table alone, the house far too quiet for how large it suddenly felt. I didn't realise I had been staring at the same cup of tea until the front door opened. "Mom?" My daughter, Claire, stepped inside, dropping her briefcase by the entryway. Her voice always had this sharpness to it, like she was already bracing for an argument I hadn't started. "I got your message," she said, setting her phone on the table. "You said it was urgent." I studied her for a moment. The crisp blazer, the tired eyes, the way she scanned the room like a lawyer walking into a negotiation. "I think your father is planning something with the company," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I found out he's been shifting meetings, reassigning projects, and today I saw him signing contracts with his assistant." Claire exhaled sharply, not in shock, but in frustration. "Mum, we've talked about this. You stepped back from the company years ago. Maybe this is just the natural transition." Natural transition? Like erasing me from my own life was some corporate life cycle event. I shook my head gently. This wasn't discussed, and that assistant, she's not just working beside him, she's working against me. Claire pulled out her laptop, fingers already typing. "I'll have my team pull the latest public filings. If there's anything unusual, we'll find it." Her voice was cool, distant, professional. But what I needed wasn't a lawyer. I needed my daughter. "Claire," I said softly, "I'm not asking you to fix this. I'm asking if you believe me." She stopped typing. The room went still for a moment, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then she looked up, her expression careful. "I believe you think something's happening, but this sounds like you're seeing shadows where there might not be any." I felt the words land like a quiet slap. I had raised her to be practical, logical. And now, in my moment of uncertainty, all she offered me was analysis. She stood, gathering her things. "Let me know if you want me to send a cease and desist. But honestly, maybe it's time to let Dad run the company. You've earned your rest." Rest? I wasn't tired. I was being erased. She kissed my cheek lightly on her way out. "I'll call you tomorrow," she promised, her voice already distant as the door closed behind her, and just like that, I was alone again. The tea had gone cold, but I drank it anyway. The house was still again. Even the clock in the hallway seemed to pause, as if the world was holding its breath. I sat there unmoving, the tea long forgotten beside me. The words Claire left behind echoed in the corners of the room. "Maybe it's time to let Dad run the company. Maybe you've earned your rest." I had heard those words before, just wrapped in different voices. Colleagues who smiled too politely, family friends who said, "Isn't it wonderful how you let him take the lead?" Even my younger self, who once whispered, "It's easier this way, less conflict." But easier doesn't always mean right. I stood and walked down the hall to the home office we rarely used anymore. Dust rested softly on the bookshelves, untouched contracts stacked in the corner. I pulled open the bottom drawer of the old oak desk, the one we bought second-hand when the company was just a hope scribbled on napkins. And there it was, the original incorporation papers, signed by both of us, but mine first, filed under my name, registered in my maiden name. Back when I wasn't just his wife, I was a partner, an equal. My hand trembled slightly as I traced the faded signature, a reminder of who I used to be before titles like Mrs. and Mom softened my edges. I had spent so long standing behind him, letting him wear the crown while I built the kingdom. And now he thought I had forgotten what we built and whose name was written in its foundation. I closed the drawer slowly, the papers still in place, but my resolve growing clearer. The company wasn't his to give away, it was ours, and legally, mostly mine. I sat down in the quiet of that dusty room, the weight of the years pressing gently on my shoulders. I could feel the pen from earlier still in my coat pocket. Not just a writing tool, but a reminder. For so long, I thought power was something you gave away for love. But maybe holding on to it was a kind of love too. Love for yourself, for your legacy. The air felt lighter somehow, though nothing in the room had changed. Tomorrow, I would start making calls. But tonight, I would allow myself this one quiet truth. I am not invisible. I never was. The next morning, I called Tom. Tom had been our corporate attorney for almost 15 years. He wasn't flashy, and he didn't chase headlines, but he knew the bones of our company better than anyone. When he answered the phone, his voice was polite but cautious. "It's been a while. Everything all right?" "No, Tom," I said plainly. "Everything is not all right." I explained what I had seen, the contracts over coffee, the meetings I'd been removed from, the slow erasure of my name from the daily workings of the business. I expected him to hesitate, maybe tell me I was imagining things, but instead, there was silence, a pause just long enough to confirm what I feared most. "How long has it been going on?" I asked. Tom exhaled. "Honestly, months. He's been preparing to sell part of the company, said it was to streamline operations and bring in fresh leadership. He made it sound like you were stepping down." "I never said that." My voice was calm, but my stomach tightened. "I figured as much," Tom admitted quietly. "But the way the paperwork's been written, it leaves the door wide open. He's been setting it up so that if no one contests it, it looks clean. No one's going to question the founder's husband transferring control, unless you do." I leaned back in my chair, letting the truth settle around me. It wasn't just a betrayal of love anymore. It was a betrayal of trust, of business, of legacy. "Tom, do you still have the original ownership filings?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Of course," he said, "filed under your name. 70% ownership, clear as day. He's got 30%, but you've always had controlling interest. Always had. But somehow, somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten to hold it." I closed my eyes briefly, exhaling the years I'd spent letting him take the credit, take the spotlight, take the meetings. And now, he thought he could take the company too. "How soon can you draw up a stop order on the sale?" I asked, my voice steady. Tom didn't hesitate. "I can start today, but you'll need to present your claim publicly. Otherwise, it'll just look like an internal dispute." I smiled faintly, the weight of 40 years pressing against my shoulders. "I'm ready to step into the room, Tom. I think it's time they remembered who helped build the walls." For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something close to peace. Tomorrow, I would walk into that office not as someone's wife. I hadn't thought about that first winter in years. The company was barely a company back then, just the two of us, working late nights at the kitchen table, invoices stacked beside baby bottles, laptop cords tangled with colouring books. He had always been the louder one, the visionary, the dreamer, the voice in the room that made people listen. And I was the one balancing the numbers when the dream ran short on cash. One night, after we secured our first real investor, I drafted the company registration. I listed both our names as founders, equal partners. It felt fair. It felt right. But when he read the draft, he hesitated. "Two names on the top line might confuse people," he said gently. "Investors like to see a clear leader, a face they can trust." I remember sitting there, exhausted from another sleepless night, with a colicky Claire in the next room, my mind stretched between motherhood and business. "What do you mean?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. "You've always hated public speaking," he smiled. "And I've already been the one talking to the investors. Let's just make it simple." Simple. That word wrapped itself around my heart like a soft noose. I stared at the contract draft in my hands, 2 names, side by side, or 1 name, front and centre. I wanted peace, stability. I wanted our family to survive this risk we were taking. So I told myself it didn't matter whose name was at the top, as long as the work got done. I took the pen, the same silver pen, and signed his name first. Mine second. "I trust you," I said back then, handing him the document. He kissed my forehead and said, "That's why this works." But now, decades later, I could still feel the weight of that pen in my hand. I had trusted him to carry us forward, but I hadn't prepared for the day he'd carry us apart. I returned to the present. The dusty home office still quiet around me. How many other decisions had I made for the sake of simple? How many times had I stepped aside to let him shine, only to find myself in the shadows? Maybe I wasn't angry at him anymore. Maybe I was finally angry at myself for thinking my silence was love instead of fear. I stood slowly, setting the memory aside, but keeping the lesson. Tomorrow, I wouldn't stay quiet. Tomorrow, the woman who signed second would speak first. The next evening, Claire stopped by again, her briefcase in one hand and a guarded expression in the other. "I pulled the filings," she said, sliding a folder onto the table. "Dad's been moving assets into side companies. He's prepping for a full takeover." I nodded. It wasn't news anymore. But what surprised me was the tightness in Claire's voice, the hesitation I hadn't heard before. She sat across from me, scanning my face like she was searching for weakness. "Are you sure you want to fight this? You've always avoided conflict." I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that feels more like an exhale. Maybe I avoided conflict because I thought love was louder than power. I paused, meeting her eyes. But now I realise love and power aren't opposites. Love without respect is just quiet sacrifice. Claire blinked, the words hitting somewhere she didn't expect. I leaned forward slightly, voice softer now. "Do you know why I let your father take the lead all those years ago?" She shook her head, her walls still up but cracking. "Because I thought it didn't matter whose name people said out loud, as long as our family was safe. As long as you had a home and a future." I let the quiet settle between us, not rushing to fill it. But now he's risking everything we built. Not just my name, yours too. Claire looked down at the table, fingers resting on the legal folder. "It's just business, Mum. People shift companies all the time." I shook my head gently. It's not just business when it's your life's work. It's not just business when someone erases your part of the story. For the first time, Claire's voice softened. "What do you want me to do?" I took a breath I didn't realise I'd been holding for years. "I don't want you to fight my battle. I want you to understand why I'm fighting it." She studied me, her lawyer's mind weighing my words against the woman she thought I was. Finally, she nodded once, small, but real. "I'll represent you in the shareholder meeting," she said quietly, "if that's what you want." "It is," I said simply, "but not because I'm afraid of losing the company. I'm afraid of losing myself." Claire gathered her things, more thoughtful this time. "Then I'll see you in the boardroom." And just like that, for the first time in years, I wasn't standing alone. Not entirely. I needed someone who knew the system better than my husband did, someone who still remembered who built this company before the shiny offices and PR teams made it look effortless. So I called Evelyn Hayes. Evelyn was our first operations manager, long retired now, spending her days tending to a rose garden and hosting book clubs. But in the early days, she was the glue that held our chaos together. And more importantly, she still knew every crack in this company's foundation. She answered on the second ring, her voice steady as ever. "I was wondering when you'd call." "You've heard?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Small town companies, big town gossip," she said with a dry laugh. "And your husband's never been good at keeping his ambitions quiet." I paused, then asked the question that felt heavier than anything else. "Will you help me?" Evelyn was silent for a beat, then spoke softly, without hesitation. "I helped you build it. I won't watch him take it." We met that afternoon in her sunroom, sunlight filtering through lace curtains, the air filled with the scent of blooming roses and old paper. I laid out everything, the contracts Tom had uncovered, the meetings I'd been excluded from, the slow rewriting of the company's narrative. She listened without interrupting, her fingers steepled in thought. Finally, she spoke. "He's building his house of cards on the assumption that you'll stay quiet. The minute you speak, the foundation shifts." "And if he fights back?" I asked. Evelyn smiled, soft but sharp. "Then you remind him who signed the mortgage." There was no bravado in her voice, no hunger for revenge, just a quiet sense of justice, of setting things right. She pulled out a faded notebook, flipping through pages of old policies, board structures, and shareholder agreements we'd written long before lawyers cleaned them up. "Start with the bylaws. They're your sword and shield." He forgot that in his rush to modernize everything. For the first time, the battle didn't feel so lonely. It felt winnable. Evelyn helped me draft a resolution to freeze any asset transfers until the shareholder meeting. It wasn't flashy, but it was legal, and it was enough to buy me time. As we finished, she placed her hand over mine, gentle but firm. "You gave him the spotlight because you loved him. Now take it back because you love yourself." The words stayed with me long after I left her house. Tomorrow, I'd sign the first resolution, and for once, the signature on top would be mine. The next morning, I returned to the office before sunrise. The halls felt emptier somehow, like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I unlocked my office door, the same one that once bore both our names on the plaque outside. Now it only bore his. I sat at the desk, where I had once written our first contracts, drawn up our first payroll, where I'd worked quietly behind the scenes while his name filled the headlines. I opened the drawer and pulled out the pen, the same silver pen he had used to sign me out of my own company just days ago. I turned it over in my hand, the engraved initials catching the morning light, once a symbol of our partnership, then a witness to my erasure, and today, my tool to reclaim what was mine. Tom had emailed the documents earlier that morning, a temporary resolution freezing all asset transfers and executive decisions pending the shareholder meeting. The legal language was precise, unassuming on the surface, but the implications were clear. I placed the document on the desk, smoothing the corners with my hands. I could almost hear Evelyn's voice in my ear. "Remind him who signed the mortgage." I clicked the pen open. No ceremony, no witnesses, just me, the paper, and a quiet resolve that felt stronger than any applause. With a single stroke, I signed my name. First, not second, not beneath his. For the first time in years, it felt right, not loud, not triumphant, just right. I scanned the page once more before setting the pen down gently beside it, its purpose fulfilled for now, resting quietly like it belonged here. I emailed the signed copy to Tom and CC'd the board members, simple, direct, leaving no room for speculation. It was done. No press conference, No confrontation in the lobby, just a single document shifting the balance of power back where it belonged. The room remained still, no applause, no fanfare, but in that silence, I felt a quiet kind of power settle into place. I closed the drawer, the pen staying on top of the desk this time, visible, present. A reminder, not of what I lost, but of what I'd built. For now, the fight was on hold. But soon it would be public, and when it was, I wouldn't be the one hiding behind closed doors. Later that afternoon, Claire walked into my office without knocking. She stopped just inside the doorway, her sharp eyes scanning the desk, the signed documents, the forwarded emails to the board, the pen resting quietly beside them. "You already filed the freeze?" she asked, surprised. I nodded, my hands folded calmly on the desk. Yes. First thing this morning. Claire crossed her arms, lips pressed in thought. I could see her lawyer's mind calculating next steps, but something softer flickered behind her focus. Maybe surprise, maybe pride? "You didn't wait for me," she said, not accusing, just observing. "No," I replied gently. "I've waited long enough." She took a slow breath and stepped closer, her tone losing some of its professional distance. "I reviewed the bylaws. You were right. Dad can't legally sell without majority consent, but he was betting no one would challenge him." I tilted my head slightly. "I taught him how to read those bylaws, remember?" Her lips quirked, the smallest ghost of a smile. "I guess I forgot you taught me, too." For the first time, the weight between us felt lighter, not gone, but shifting. Claire pulled out a chair across from me, sitting down without the usual rush to get back to work. "There's still the shareholder meeting. He'll try to rally support." "I know." I paused, then added, "But for once, he'll be the one fighting from behind." She tapped her fingers on the edge of the desk, thoughtful. "I spoke with the junior partners this morning. Some of them are conflicted. They respect him, but they know the company wasn't built on shortcuts." "Will they listen to you?" I asked. She shrugged, honest. "They'll listen if I give them a reason to." I studied her, my daughter, the lawyer, the woman I had shielded from boardrooms like this her whole life. Maybe I'd done her a disservice by keeping her in the audience instead of on stage. "Then give them one," I said softly. Claire met my gaze, the first true alignment between us in months, maybe years. She stood to leave, but paused, glancing at the pen on the desk. "Dad always thought that pen was his good luck charm," she said, a quiet laugh beneath the words. I smiled gently. "Turns out it was mine all along." She nodded once, then left the room without another word. But this time her footsteps didn't sound like she was walking away. They sounded like she was clearing a path. The next morning, Claire arrived early, before the office filled with voices and agendas. She placed her laptop on my desk, clearing a space beside the freeze order I had signed the day before. "Meetings in 3 days," she said, sliding her notes toward me. "We need enough shareholder support by then to block any motions your husband brings forward." I smiled faintly at her phrasing. "Your husband, not Dad." There was distance in it now. Professional. Intentional. "Where do we stand?" I asked. She pulled up a spreadsheet, names and percentages lining the screen. "Right now, you control 70%, but a few minor shareholders hold voting rights for key divisions. If Dad convinces even 1 or 2 of them to abstain or side with him, it'll muddy the waters." "Who's at risk?" I leaned in. Claire highlighted several names. Marcus Fields, longtime friend of Dad's, but more loyal to the company's profits than personal alliances. And Janet Rhodes, she's on the fence, never liked conflict, tends to side with whoever seems most stable. "So we show them stability," I said simply. Claire nodded, a spark of approval in her eyes. I've already drafted a company update outlining how you'll maintain operations. Reassure them. Make this transition look clean, not chaotic. For a moment, I just watched her work, shoulders squared, voice steady, mind sharp. She was the daughter I had raised to think for herself, and maybe, finally, I had stopped standing in her way. Tom is finalising the shareholder notification, Claire continued, pulling me back. But he warned Dad may try to push an emergency vote before the official meeting. We need to be ready for that. I nodded. Then we'll be ready. There was a quiet rhythm to our planning, like old partners rediscovering their sync. For years, I thought protecting Claire meant shielding her from boardrooms and balance sheets, but maybe protecting her meant showing her how to stand in them without flinching. We spent the next few hours drafting emails, reviewing financial projections, and mapping out contingencies. No one raised their voice. No one panicked. We just worked. Two women who finally saw each other clearly. As the morning sun crept across the office floor, I glanced at the calendar on the wall. 3 days. 3 days to reclaim a legacy I thought I had lost. Claire packed up her laptop, pausing at the door. Lunch tomorrow. No business talk, just us. I smiled. The first real smile in days. Lunch sounds perfect. She left, and for the first time, the office didn't feel empty when she was gone. It felt ready. The first cracks appeared at noon. A junior partner rushed into my office, phone in hand, face pale. It's trending. I raised an eyebrow, calm on the surface. What's trending? He hesitated, then turned his screen toward me. An industry news blog splashed across the headline, "Leadership Battle Brewing at Walker and Hayes. Sources say founding couple facing split power struggle." My stomach tightened, not because I was surprised, but because it was faster than I expected. Sources, of course, meant whispers from the assistant's lunch meetings, or maybe even the assistant herself. She was smart. If she couldn't control the board, she'd control the narrative. Claire arrived minutes later, phone already buzzing with calls from investors and colleagues. "Mom, we need a statement. Now, if you stay quiet, you'll look weak, or worse, irrelevant." I looked at her, steady. I didn't build this company by shouting louder than the headlines. Claire's jaw tensed. "And what if silence costs you the vote?" I paused, letting the weight of her question settle. Then I spoke softly, measured. Then we remind them who built the foundation they're standing on. But even as I spoke, I felt the hours slipping through my fingers. The shareholder meeting was 2 days away. If the narrative spun too far out of control before then, facts wouldn't matter. "Draft a statement," I said, standing from my chair. "Something simple, not defensive, just a reminder of the truth." Claire nodded, already typing. I walked to the window, watching employees file into the parking lot for lunch breaks, phones in hand, conversations swirling like wildfire. How many of them had already chosen a side? How many still remembered that the company name carried 2 founders? Not one. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. Time wasn't on my side anymore, but clarity was. That afternoon, our official statement went live. Since its founding, Walker and Hayes has been built on shared leadership and long-standing values of integrity and partnership. Those values remain unchanged. Any future decisions will be made transparently and in accordance with our founding agreements. It wasn't flashy. It didn't attack, but it planted a flag. That evening, calls trickled in, some supportive, some cautious, some simply waiting to see which way the wind would blow. But the countdown had started. 2 days left to secure the board, steady the staff, and remind myself why I was fighting in the first place. The next morning, I gathered the senior leadership team in the small boardroom. No press, No shareholders, just the people who had weathered every storm with us over the decades. They sat in a tight circle, eyes wary, waiting to see which way this story would turn. Claire stood in the corner, observing but silent. She had offered to speak for me. I told her no. Some battles you have to fight in your own voice. I looked around the room, at Janet, who had built our HR department from a one-person desk, at Marcus, who had closed our first national deal, at the CFO who had joined when we couldn't afford a full salary. These past few days have been noisy, I began quietly. But the foundation of this company isn't in the headlines, it's in the people who built it. They shifted slightly, listening. I paused, steadying my breath. Years ago, your father and I caught myself, corrected. My husband and I used to say something when times got hard. I let the words linger. This company is our family. I saw a flicker of recognition in a few faces. The old mantra, the phrase he used when asking for their loyalty, their sacrifice. But today, I gave it back to them with something different behind it. And like any family, sometimes you have to protect it from the people who forget what family really means. Silence, not uncomfortable, just still. I let the weight of that truth settle. I'm not here to tear down what we've built. I'm here to make sure it lasts beyond us, beyond me, beyond him. Janet shifted forward first, her voice quiet but steady. What do you need from us? I smiled, small but real. Your honesty, your vote, and your belief that we're stronger together than apart. One by one, the room nodded. Not loudly, not theatrically, but in quiet agreement. A family of builders choosing once again to build. Claire caught my eye across the room, a faint smile breaking through her usual reserve. For once, I didn't see judgment in her face. I saw pride. As the meeting ended, I remained seated, letting the moment settle before it slipped away. The pen sat untouched beside my notes. I didn't need it today. Today, my words were enough. But soon, I would pick it up again, and when I did, I wouldn't be writing alone. He was waiting outside the boardroom, phone in hand, smiling as though today was already his victory. When he saw me approaching, his smile didn't falter, but his eyes, they flickered. Didn't expect to see you this early, he said, sliding his phone into his pocket. I figured you'd stay out of the politics like always. I paused a few feet away, the morning sun filtering through the tall glass windows between us. Employees moved past, stealing quick glances, pretending not to notice. I used to think staying quiet was the noble choice, I said softly, letting you lead because it made you feel whole. He chuckled, low and casual, and look where it got us. This company grew because I wasn't afraid to make noise. I met his gaze steadily. No, it grew because I built something worth hearing about. For a moment, the air thickened. The hallway quieted. He stepped closer, voice dropping. Don't do this here. Let's handle this privately. You don't need to prove anything. I held up the silver pen, not pointing it at him, just letting it catch the light between us. You already tried to handle it privately, I said, voice calm. That's how we got here. His smile cracked, just slightly. This doesn't end well for you, he warned, softer now, almost pleading. I tilted my head. No, this doesn't end the way you planned. There's a difference. Behind me, Claire stood quietly at the corner, arms crossed, watching without interference. I could feel her presence, steady and silent, no longer protecting me, but standing with me. He shifted his stance, recalculating. You think the board will side with sentiment? Business isn't built on nostalgia. I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't ask for agreement. No, it's built on trust. And lately, you've been bankrupting yours. For a long second, neither of us spoke. The sounds of the office crept back in, the hum of printers, the distant chatter of morning meetings, the familiar rhythm of a company still running, regardless of who thought they ran it. Finally, he stepped aside, gesturing toward the boardroom doors. "After you." I walked past him, the pen in my hand and the weight of 40 years behind me. For the first time, I wasn't following his lead. I was walking my own path. The boardroom felt colder than usual. 15 faces lined the long oak table, each one waiting for the meeting to begin, but no one daring to start it. Power shifted quietly in places like this, not through shouting, but through silence waiting to be filled. He sat at the head of the table, confident, hands folded like a king awaiting his coronation. I sat halfway down, the silver pen resting by my papers. I had no interest in reclaiming his seat. My power didn't need a chair. The corporate secretary cleared her throat. "We're here today to discuss the proposed restructuring." Before she could finish, Claire spoke, clear, steady, and without looking at me. "There will be no restructuring today." All heads turned. Hers was the only voice in the room that didn't waver. "My mother holds majority ownership as outlined in our founding documents. No restructuring, no leadership changes, and no asset transfers can proceed without her consent." He leaned forward slightly, smile tight. "Claire, this is a family matter. Don't drag the board into—" She cut him off, polite but sharp. "With respect, Dad, when you used company resources to plan this, it stopped being a family matter." The room stilled. It wasn't anger in her voice, it was clarity. The kind of clarity I had carried alone for years. Claire continued, her gaze steady on the board. "Walker and Hayes was built on shared leadership. Any decisions moving forward will reflect that legacy. Simple, director." And enough. Around the table, glances exchanged, silent agreements forming in the quiet. The CFO cleared his throat. "I move that we table the restructuring discussion until after a full shareholder review." "Seconded," said Marcus Fields without hesitation. The votes were quiet but decisive. Hands raised, motions passed. The meeting's tension broke like a wave receding from shore. My husband sat back, realizing, for the first time, that the room no longer belonged to him. Claire gathered her notes, standing to leave without fanfare. But before she turned away, her hand brushed across the table near my pen. She didn't take it. She didn't need to. She knew where the power rested and who had earned the right to hold it. Our eyes met briefly. No words, no thanks, just an understanding. Her quiet redemption wasn't for me, it was for herself. As the boardroom emptied, I remained seated for a moment, the hum of the city below filling the silence. I didn't win today because I spoke louder. I won because, finally, I didn't speak alone. The boardroom had long since emptied. Outside the window, the city lights blinked softly against the fading sky, another workday ending like so many before it. But today, something felt different. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost walking through my own company. I felt present, visible, enough. I walked the quiet halls alone, passing the framed photos of our early days, the first product launch, the cramped startup office, the ribbon-cutting ceremony where I stood just outside the frame. Funny how easy it had been to step out of the picture, how hard it was to step back in. I returned to my office, now dimly lit by the last rays of sunset. The silver pen sat where I had left it, waiting but not demanding. It wasn't a symbol of battle anymore, just a pen, just mine. I sat at my desk, opening the old notebook I used to carry everywhere. The pages were filled with scribbled ideas, supplier lists, and hand-drawn flowcharts from when the company was just an idea between two tired dreamers. On the last page, I wrote quietly, "Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you refuse to give away before you're ready." The words didn't feel like a statement of victory. They felt like truth, quiet, uncomplicated. I closed the notebook and looked around the room. This space had always felt like his stage, but today it was just an office, a tool, like the pen, like the title, like the company. Tools aren't meant to define you, they're meant to serve the work you believe in. And tomorrow, there would still be work, meetings, decisions, people to lead, not control. But tonight, there was peace. I stood slowly, slipping the pen into the drawer, not hidden this time, but resting where it belonged. No headlines, no grand gestures, just the quiet knowledge that I had reclaimed my story. As I turned out the lights and stepped into the hallway, I passed the old company plaque hanging near the exit. It still bore both our names, side by side. For a moment, I thought about changing it. But then I smiled. Some things you leave as they are, not because they tell the whole story, but because they remind you how far you've come from it. Monday morning arrived without ceremony. The office hummed with the usual rhythm of ringing phones and clacking keyboards. No headlines today, no whispers in the hallways, just work. And for the first time in weeks, that felt like enough. I walked the floor, stopping by teams I hadn't visited in far too long. "How's the Jenkins account coming along?" I asked marketing. "Let's revisit the Q3 projections this week," I reminded finance. No one flinched at my presence. No one looked past me, waiting for someone else to speak first. It was quiet respect, built over years, finally stepping back into the light. At lunch, I returned to my office and found a note on my desk, Claire's handwriting. "Good meeting today. Let me know when you're ready to start planning next quarter's strategy." C. No flowery words, no apology, just partnership. I smiled softly, tucking the note into my notebook where I'd written my quiet truth days before. Legacy wasn't loud. It was passed quietly, hand to hand, page to page. That afternoon, I packed up earlier than usual, a habit I hadn't allowed myself in years. The company didn't need me to stay late every night anymore. It needed me to trust that I'd built something strong enough to stand without constant guarding. At home, the kitchen felt warmer somehow, even in its usual stillness. I brewed tea, the familiar scent filling the air. No cold cup abandoned in the night this time. Tonight, I would drink it while it was still warm. The mail sat untouched on the counter. A magazine cover caught my eye, one we'd been on together years ago. Two faces, side by side, smiling for the camera. Once that image had been my whole world. Now, it was just part of the story, not the whole thing. I flipped the magazine over, placing it face down, not out of bitterness, just readiness to focus on the next chapter. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, one by one, like gentle applause for a quiet victory no one else needed to see. Tomorrow would be another workday, another meeting, another decision. But for tonight, there was stillness. And in that stillness, I finally felt free. The office was quiet when Claire slipped in after hours. Most of the lights were off, casting long shadows across the floor. She hadn't meant to stay this late, but something about the stillness called to her. She stopped outside her mother's office. The door was slightly open, as if waiting for someone to step in. For a moment, Claire hesitated, unsure if this was still her mother's space alone, or now a shared one. She pushed the door open gently. The desk was just as her mother had left it, neat, purposeful, familiar. And there, beside a closed notebook, rested the silver pen. Claire approached, her footsteps soft against the carpet. She picked up the pen, turning it over in her hands. It was heavier than she expected, not in weight, but in meaning. She remembered the countless nights as a child when she'd peeked through this very doorway, watching her mother work long after the world had gone to bed. Back then, she thought her mother was simply present, stable, someone who kept the house running. She never realised how much her mother was holding up, not just the home, but the family's future. Claire placed the pen back down, careful, almost reverent. She sat in her mother's chair for a moment, letting the silence surround her. No ringing phones, no sharp debates, just space to think. For the first time, she understood why her mother had stayed quiet for so long, not out of weakness, but out of love, out of strategy, out of the belief that legacy doesn't always need to be loud to last. Claire opened the notebook and found a familiar phrase written in her mother's steady hand. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you refuse to give away before you're ready. The words settled into her chest like a soft anchor. She closed the notebook and stood, smoothing her blazer, her reflection catching in the darkened window. For a brief second, she saw not just herself, but a reflection of the woman who sat in this chair before her, and perhaps, someday, another generation beyond her. She switched off the lamp, leaving the pen resting quietly in its place. Some inherit companies, some inherit titles, but the greatest inheritance is knowing when to speak, and when to let your actions speak for you. Claire closed the door behind her, her footsteps steady, her path clear. Tomorrow, she would lead not because she had to, but because now she understood why it mattered. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I finally knew the moment had come. No boardrooms, no contracts, just the two of us, sitting across the kitchen table where it all began. Claire sipped her coffee, scrolling through quarterly reports on her tablet. Business never fully stopped for her, but there was something softer in her shoulders now. Less guarded, more grounded. I reached into my bag and placed the silver pen on the table between us. She looked at it, her brow furrowing slightly. "What's this?" I smiled, small but steady. The only tool I ever needed to build this company. She didn't reach for it right away. Claire was never one to grab what wasn't offered freely. I slid it across the table, slow and deliberate. For years, I thought this pen belonged to whoever shouted the loudest, but it was never about the pen. It was about who carried the responsibility it represented. Claire held my gaze, the weight of the moment settling between us like an old song we both knew but hadn't sung together in years. She picked it up gently, turning it over in her hands. "What do you want me to do with it?" I shook my head softly. "It's not about what I want. It's about what you believe should come next." She smiled then, quiet and real, the kind of smile that doesn't seek permission. "I think I'll keep writing the story, but in my own handwriting." I laughed, a lightness I hadn't felt in years rising to the surface. "That's all I ever hoped for." For a while we sat in companionable silence, no instructions, no lists, just two women, bound not by blood alone, but by purpose. Outside, the late afternoon sun stretched across the floor, casting long, golden beams over the kitchen counter, where bills, homework, and business plans had once shared space. Claire slipped the pen into her coat pocket, not for display, but for use. It no longer belonged on a pedestal. It belonged in motion. As she gathered her things to leave, she paused at the door. "Lunch again next week?" she asked. I smiled softly. "Next time, my treat." She nodded, slipping out into the cool afternoon air, leaving the door open just a little behind her, and in that simple, ordinary exit, I saw the extraordinary truth of it all. Legacy isn't the company. It's not the pen. It's not the name on the door. Legacy is knowing that when your chapter ends, the story keeps going, stronger, wiser, and written in new hands. That night, long after the dishes were washed and the house fell quiet, I sat alone by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. I used to think life was built on grand speeches and bold declarations, but now I realise it's the quiet choices, the ones no one else sees, that build your legacy. I didn't need applause to know I mattered. I didn't need headlines to prove I led. The company would grow. Claire would lead in her own way. And my story, well, my story wasn't over. But maybe, for the first time, I was content to let it continue without my constant direction. I took a breath, soft and steady, and let the quiet fill the space I had spent years trying to control. And I wondered how many of us spend our lives waiting for permission to be seen, waiting for someone to tell us we've done enough, that we are enough, without earning another title, signing another deal, or sacrificing another piece of ourselves. And when the moment finally comes to take back our story, will we recognize it? Or will we let it slip by, unnoticed, while we wait for a louder sign? I'll ask you quietly, without expectation, if you built something your whole life, would you give it away without a fight? Or would you finally step forward and write your own ending?